Hello, this is Robert Rickover. I'm an Alexander Technique teacher in Omaha, Nebraska. Teach in Toronto, Canada, but right now mostly online. My guest today is Laura Donnelly, who's an Alexander Technique teacher in Manhattan, Kansas. She's also a mentor, choreographer, dancer, and writer. And she teaches something she calls body-brain balance based on the principles of the Alexander technique, movement fundamentals, and somatics. And we're going to talk today about that process that she teaches and how it can be useful for people. Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Robert. It's great to see you.
Great to see you again. Could we start by you giving our viewers and listeners a brief description of the Alexander technique?
Sure. For me, I say that the Alexander technique is a way of observing how we do whatever it is we choose to do, and learning to do those activities with the exact right amount of effort.
So it's about how we do things much more than what the things are that we've chosen to do. And
Yes.
Maybe just a word or two about body-brain balance. And I think you use the term moving out of pain as a way of describing your process. Could you say a little bit about that as well?
Yes. First, I have a broad definition of pain, that it can be mental pain, emotional pain, physical pain, or spiritual pain. And moving happens all the time. As long as we're alive, we're moving. And so we're either moving in a direction that's causing us more stress and anxiety and tension in our body, or we're moving in a direction that is allowing us to release that extra tension in our system. And then the whole body is connected. So if I start with a physical area of pain that I know I have sometimes, that my neck or my shoulder is tight, and I work with myself and I do my constructive thinking, and I'll just let that soften. Everything else softens. My breathing softens, my thinking, the space in my head for my thoughts kind of opens up. I feel a little better. I smile, and everything is just a tiny bit better. And that's moving out of pain. So it's very delicate.
Right. And I think a lot of
And
people
gentle.
think that they've got to do something a little more dramatic than that to get out of pain. I think, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh,
Yeah.
Do you agree with that? That people think, oh, I'm in pain, I got to do something not as subtle as what you just described. Like, I got to strengthen some muscles, or
I got to take a pill.
Take a pill. Well, there's a solution. Sure. Yeah. Right.
Yes. I think sometimes that happens. And one of the things that you and I sometimes talked about a little bit ago was that for me, the Alexander technique is a foundation that I do. It's the way I do everything that I do. It's something that I stand on and work on and play on and dance on and even drive my car on. And so even if somebody needs to go to physical therapy to strengthen some part of their body, you can go to physical therapy and do 15 reps of this thing to fix your arm or your shoulder. You did it, but how did you do it? Did you do it in a way that tensed up your whole body? Because then you did the action and you built in the memory of the tension into your action. If instead I think, okay, I want to do this, say this exercise, or a forward pull back exercise, and I think to myself, okay, my PT person just said, reach this thing, come back, reach this thing, come back, and I'm bored and I don't want to do it. But if I instead You can even hear my voice when I did it that way, change
Yeah,
the quality of my voice. So
right.
instead, if I say, I wonder how doing this action of letting my arm go forward and letting my arm come back, how does that change things in my body? Can I just do it with my arm? Oh, no, look, my whole body is connected. And when I move this arm forward, really, I kind of want to twist a little. Is that okay? Or do I want to not twist? How gently can I not twist as I move that arm? And suddenly, all these boring exercises that my PT might have given me are an exploration into how my body moves and how it heals. And I had a knee surgery a number of years ago, and I was going to rehab, and they were like, well, do 20 of these things. And I started out, and about 10 or 11, I noticed that the first 5 were perfect. The next ones I felt a little muscle building and a little extra effort. And then about 11 or so, I'm like, oh yeah, now I'm starting to push with my stomach. And this is a leg strengthening exercise. I don't want to transfer the muscular effort. So I called my person back over and I said, look, this is what's happening. I think I'm using the wrong muscles now. This is because of my dance history, my dance training, my movement training. And she says, you're right. I said, all right, can I do 10 and take a small break and do 10 more? Because in my world, 10 done with the right amount of effort and energy and no extra tension, that's way better than 20 or 30 done with as much effort as I can do it just to reach that number. That's the end gaining number. End gaining was a big eye opener for me from the Alexander technique.
And just to
To look at
explain
that
explain
concept was
to
great.
our viewers what that means, end gaining is what you have something you want to do, and your intent is just to do it, but not be particularly interested in
End gaining.
how you do it, right? Yeah. Does that make sense to
So
you?
for me, and the shortest definition of end gaining I give for myself is where I want a desired result and I don't care about the cost.
Right.
And that was certainly true in dancing. Like if you were like hurt yourself a little bit, right? You would tape up the injury and keep going because you didn't want to miss class, you didn't want to fall behind, you didn't want to get out of shape, and even though the thing didn't feel really good, you just pushed through it to get to the desired result. Except that pushing through it, what I didn't understand before I took the Alexander technique uh, training and turned it into a process that I used to run my whole life. I didn't understand that pushing through something like that actually embedded the tension and an imbalance, because even if like I had twisted my ankle and I taped it and it was okay, I was standing on my left side. I wasn't really standing on 2 feet because that one hurt foot didn't want me to stand on it. So I was out of balance.
Mm-hmm.
And my brain and my body were out of balance. My brain wanted this thing and it said, I don't care if your body hurts, do it anyway. Okay. This is also not to say that sometimes you don't have to push yourself past the point of comfort.
Mm-hmm.
You do need to build muscle. And if you're in rehab, you need to rebuild muscle. But it's how we build the muscle. Back to that thing, how we do what we do.
Right, right. Well, another way of saying that would be if you're using a large amount of effort to do the movement that you're being asked to do, you're doing that in the context of the habit that may indeed have caused the original injury. That you're using a system to repair itself without changing anything about how it functions, and that doesn't work. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
It would
I mean,
be like you're driving your car and things aren't going so well. So maybe the solution is to drive it faster. And all you're doing is just, you know, creating more of a problem.
right.
You
And
got
that's a normal human response, you know, because like we started out something, we couldn't do something, we learned how to do it. Maybe we want to be able to do it better. So we go back to what we learned and we do that more, harder, and faster.
instead of more thoughtfully,
Yes. Yes.
mindfully, maybe that is a better word.
Um,
Yeah.
right. And instead of looking at what what is out of balance, and we talked about this with dance teachers, is that they often give the student something to do that they saw somebody do well. They saw the effect of good thinking. And so they describe the effect. And then everybody tries to create that effect. So an example of that would be, let me think of a good example of that. Well, like they might say, move with power and force. Okay, so I think, what is power and force? And I'm moving with power and force. And I feel like I'm doing something. And the teacher's like, no, more. And so I do, so I go, okay, you know, and then it's still not right. As I practice the Alexander technique, I learned that what I thought was power and force was too much effort. Okay, that was frustrating. And then I'm like, okay, well, how do I make a strong gesture? And I went back. So the gesture is a push and a kind of halt hand. And suddenly I have something that has this energy of stopping something. And I remembered the class I did this in, and I did it, and it felt so different. And I'm like, oh, that just had to be the wimpiest thing anybody saw. And the whole class is why a class session is, I think, really good for people.
Mhm.
The class said, oh, no, that other one was fast and brittle. And this one, I backed up because the energy of pushing away and stopping was so strong. And I'm like, then I had to go home and think.
Right. Well, I think a lot of times performers of any kind have an idea of how much tension they need to create within themselves to do the activity properly. I remember, and you might have even been there with one of Marjorie Barstow was an Alexander teacher we both studied with. And there was a class once where there was a French opera singer, and she got up to do some work with Marge, and she sang a bit with Marge helping her. And she had a really amazing voice to start with, but when Marge helped her, it just, even I, who am not particularly musical, could hear the difference. And everyone was sort of, oh, wow. And so at the end, um, you know, people, people said that really sounded so much better. And she said, that's not possible. It was not legitimate. I didn't do any work. And obviously she did some work because she had to get the sound out there, but she was so caught up in this idea of you have to do this amount of effort in order to be a legitimate singer in her case.
Or the idea that to make a certain note, she feels a certain kind of tension in her throat or a
Exactly.
certain kind of pressure
Yeah.
of the airflow. And
Yeah.
when she didn't feel those, just like me, when I did my gesture and it did not have the muscular effort that I attached to doing that gesture, it didn't seem like I did it. And the same for her. It didn't seem like she did it. And we have invested so much in learning how to do these difficult things,
Mhm.
whether it's an athletic move or a dive or a dance thing, that to suddenly realize that it's almost like the dance dances us, that we don't do the dance, then it's a change of perspective. And I think that's another thing that the Alexander technique brings into your life, is a way of looking at things maybe from the inside out instead of the outside in.
Mm-hmm.
And recognizing that how I think about something changes entirely what happens and my perception of what happens, how my body feels, whether it's a physical activity or a mental activity. And I can always return to that way of thinking and noticing my thinking. And am I thinking too hard even about something?
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah. But now sometimes people will say, well, my Alexander teacher told me not to be so caught up in feelings. But how else am I going to judge whether I'm doing it correctly or not? Or they'll say something like, my teacher said, just ignore the feelings, or, and that didn't seem right either. What would you say to that?
yeah, that's a challenge.
Yeah, it is a challenge. Yeah.
Let me think. Well, how to give yourself permission to try something different.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I recommend is that people pick something that's not quite so important to themselves.
Right.
Because the things that are most important to us, like the opera singer or me when I was performing, dancing and stuff, I had a lot invested in it, and I had a lot invested in the outcome. And therefore, I had more resistance. I would say more resistance to changing. So if I pick something like combing my hair, for example, and I would comb it before bed where I'm not going anywhere, so it doesn't matter how it looks. And one of the things I suggest to my students that they try is use your non-dominant hand and see how much effort you need. And then it feels completely different and it feels really backwards. And then I say, then switch to your dominant hand. And what they notice is suddenly they're like going, and you're like, oh. And then they start to explore with something that's totally not important in most situations. Do I have to squeeze the brush of my handle to be able to comb my hair? Does that help?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I had somebody do this with brushing her teeth, right? And she used an electronic toothbrush. Mm-hmm. And when she said, I said, what happened? And she said, I dropped the toothbrush. And I said, really? She said, I was so surprised when I had it in my non-dominant hand by the vibration of the electronic toothbrush that I did that. And I never noticed that vibration with my dominant hand.
Because she was gripping it so tightly that she was actually cutting off the
sensation,
the flow of information. Yeah. Right.
And so part of what I don't tell people that they're wrong, that they're thinking too hard or they're doing too much effort. Because, for me, if you told me to chill when I was young, oh no, that was not going to be a good solution.
Right.
I was whatever. So I just try to set up experiments, things for people to do to explore and begin to expand their awareness of their body. There is habitual comfort, and there is this sensation of new. Like I was mentioning that when I worked with Marge, one time she would have people walk, and so she would give you a nice Alexander technique lesson and experience, and she would say, "Why don't you just walk on over there and sit down?" And my body was in a place kinesthetically that I knew felt better. It was lighter. It felt expanded. It was wonderful. But in that position, I'm like, I don't know how to take a step, because without my habitual tension that I always had before I walked, I was, and so this was a learning place. And then so when people get there, I try to encourage them to explore that and create a new neural pathway. How do you walk from that place of ease? You're not going to fall. The floor is right there, And that's when we start to break the habits that we have and to do things differently. And what is this thing I'm thinking about? Oh, repeating. This is another thing in the arts and athletics. We do something well, and the teacher says, that's great. Do that again. Or the coach says, just like that next time. Next time isn't the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Because they're trying to recreate a feeling, and the feeling is something that came from the way they did it. And the way they did it came from the way they thought about how they were doing it. So they were kind of going for the result instead of the process that got them there.
Exactly.
And that's something all Alexander teachers have to play around with their students and figure out ways, because we're so used to getting our cues for what to do from what it feels like, and the feelings might be unreliable. Which it's not the same as saying you don't want to ignore your feelings, but I think it was Kathy Madden, who's an Alexander teacher, who once said, well, with regard to feelings, you just want to put a little question mark next to it. Not that you're rejecting it, but you're just saying, yeah, it might not be the best guide. Or I think Mio Morales, who we both know, would say the thing about feelings is that by the time you feel it, it's yesterday's news and the situation has changed. And if you rely on feelings, you're going to get stuck.
Right.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
And it's like that was then, and we're right here now.
Right. Exactly.
And what was right then was perfect then, but it's not perfect now.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a tricky one. I mean, takes a while for people sometimes to wrap their heads around that, because they're so used to not doing that introspection, you might say, or self-direction.
For me, it opens this possibility. And like I said, I have learned to trust the process of the Alexander technique, and to trust that when I pay attention, my body is a barometer, right? It tells me, did I get more tense and icky when I was doing that? Oh, I hear my voice. Interesting. I don't have to fix it. I just have to stop doing that. And then I say, oh, well, that's interesting. And the next moment is interesting. And the next moment is interesting. And so suddenly life is this adventure.
Right.
Of discovery.
And that relates to something that you said earlier, that when someone's a performer or an athlete, someone that's got a highly developed skill set is coming for an Alexander lesson, maybe the activity you want to work with them on might be something that's completely different from that they don't have all this investment in. Because especially if you say to a singer or performer of some kind, well, use this tonight at your concert. Whoa, that's a really high risk thing to ask someone to do. And I don't think it's even fair to ask someone to do that who's just starting. But if you say, well, let's work with walking, for example, just walking across the room, or picking up something from the floor, or raising an arm, some innocuous activity that, they don't have a huge amount invested in how they do it. And then you can kind of move into the hardcore stuff,
the things that they really want to do better.
Why they're there. They don't come necessarily because they want to walk more easily. But on the other hand, walking, for example, is a great platform to explore stuff that then can be used in the things that really matter to you. And of course, walking's kind of good anyway, because you're going to be walking to get to your concert, probably.
That's it. Well, and because everything is connected, you know, when we experience this, what, like I like to call it, body brain balance, when everything comes into a kind of dynamic and fluid alignment, it affects everything else. It affects everything that's going to happen in the future.
Sure.
Because, like you said, you're going to walk to your concert. If you walk to your concert like, you're going to get into the theater and you're going to be like, rah. Right. And sometimes people say, well, I have to get my game face on, you know, maybe your game face is right there. Maybe the right energy you need is right there. Yeah. Maybe you would have more energy if you didn't waste it on stomping to the place you were going.
Yeah.
And that is, again, for me as a teacher, I try to set up curiosity. I try to, I can't set it up, but I try to awaken curiosity in my students. What happens when you try this? What happens when you try that? You know, how is it when you do something different and it feels completely weird? Mm-hmm. How is that? Did you still manage to do that? And I suggest to people, you know, if you want to practice this with drinking, because it's really amazing with how you drink something, try water so that if you spill it on yourself, it doesn't stain your favorite shirt.
Right. Yeah.
And so like, you know, to engage curiosity and to, and hope, right? A lot of times people come to an Alexander technique when everything else is not working. Right. They've tried this, they've done vocal exercises, they've done yoga to improve, you know, whatever, and they've tried something else, and somebody told them, oh, check out the Alexander technique, and they're like, well, maybe this will work, you know, and I'm like, I can tell you it definitely will work if you do it, and we'll just start simple. And so I try to start as simple as possible because like we talked about, when you have something where you're really invested, you can go back to your old habit. But I also tell performers, we've been practicing with this, but if you're on stage and you need to complete a triple turn and finish, and you know how to do that in your habitual way, go ahead and do that. That's the perfect choice for that moment. And gradually over time, as you get more of this into your system, because I think our body adapts to it, you know, it starts to learn what is excess tension, and it starts to say, you know, I don't really like excess tension. And, you know, and dancers like, I'm going to shake that out. But, well, that does not get rid of any excess tension.
No, it does that. Definitely doesn't. I think we're kind of running out of time, but I think a point that I've tried to emphasize with my students is that your body actually is very biased towards doing things better, but it needs a nudge. It needs a mental nudge. It won't do it on its own. It's not like an automatic. If you develop some harmful habits, say you twist an ankle and you're favoring a leg, and you make some shifts that are not that great, the ankle will heal, but the residue of that will stay there until and unless you intervene. But once you intervene, if you do it intelligently, your body says, oh, yep, that's where I want to go. So you can really rely on it to be on your side when you do, as Alexander teachers would call it, constructive thinking or self-direction, whatever, that it's biased in in the right direction, totally biased in the right direction.
It's with us all the time.
Right.
And
But
it's trying to take care of us.
But the executive function up here has to kick in and tell it what you want it to do or not to do.
Right. And in that thing, like if I say, I want to hold my fingers just like this.
Yeah.
And I this one's higher, this one's lower, this one's up, this one's down, my thumb is hidden. I can do that mentally. Or I can know what that position is because I studied for a million years. And I can say with my constructive thinking, what is the easiest way to make that position? And then my body changes. And my whole arm does it. My whole self does it. And I remember teaching and I had to change how I taught dancing even, Robert. I had to really let go of a lot of old ways of speaking to incorporate this idea for my students to discover the right effort. And the other thing I really like is that if we encourage the good thing, there's more of the good thing. So if somebody's doing something and you say, well, don't do that. But if I say, if I want them to stop something, I maybe say, what would happen if you thought about this way?
Right. And experiment. Let's conduct a little low stakes experiment.
Yeah, I love that. Low stakes. That's a
Very
great way
low
to talk
stakes.
about it.
Yeah, not like you're on stage and you're in the middle of an aria and you say, oh, I'm going to use this thing. And I've just learned it last night, but I'm going to, that's maybe not the best strategy. But if it's some simple activity like walking or raising your arm, then that's pretty low stakes.
Right. And because we're all connected, our body is all connected, that if we practice in any area of our life, it affects all areas.
Everything. Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's kind of like a bank. The more you do it, it has compound interest.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think this would be a good place to bring our conversation to an end. What do you think?
I think it's perfect. And thank you so much, Robert. It's just been delightful to talk to you.
It's been a pleasure. I'll just repeat that my guest today is Laura Donnelly, an Alexander Technique teacher in Manhattan, Kansas, which just for our listeners and viewers' interest, there is a park in Manhattan, Kansas called Central Park. I was blown away when I saw that. And I'll put a link to her website by the interview and also a link to a site where you can learn more about the Alexander Technique or find a teacher anywhere. If you're anywhere near Manhattan, Kansas, and you also teach online, right? So
I do.
Yeah, so you can reach her through Laura through her website. So Laura, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, thank you, Robert. It's just been delightful.
It's been fun.
It's been really fun. So thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing you soon. We're not that far away in space and time.
Not at all. No.